Picture a room lit by a single oil lamp. It's somewhere in Egypt, centuries after the crucifixion. The air smells like dust and burnt wax. A man sits hunched over a table, copying words onto papyrus with a shaking hand, not shaking from age, but from fear. Every few minutes he stops. He listens. Footsteps outside mean danger. This text he's copying isn't supposed to exist anymore. Someone somewhere decided this knowledge was too dangerous for ordinary believers to hold. He keeps writing anyway. Why would anyone risk their life to preserve a document? What could possibly be inside those pages that made it worth more than personal safety? That question is the whole reason you're here. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand something that most churches never wanted you to see. Let's drop the scene for a second, because I want to talk to you directly. You've probably heard the phrase lost gospels thrown around before. Maybe it made you roll your eyes a little, like it's just clickbait dressed up as history. I get that. But the Pistis Sophia isn't clickbait. It's a real, ancient document, and once you actually sit with what's inside it, you start to understand why it made certain people so uncomfortable. Here's my honest opinion, right up front. I don't think this text scares people because it's fake. I think it scares people because parts of it feel true in a way that's hard to explain. It touches something in you that already suspected the story you were handed as a child was incomplete. This isn't a video about proving Christianity wrong. It's not about tearing anything down. It's about asking a much more interesting question. What if there was a version of this story that focused less on obedience and more on remembering? What if salvation wasn't about following rules, but about waking up? Stay with me, because once you see what's inside this text, you won't be able to unsee it. So let's ground this. What is the Pistis Sophia, actually? It's a Coptic manuscript, meaning it was written in the language of ancient Egyptian Christians, and it survived in something called the Askew Codex, named after the man who acquired it in the 1700s. Scholars generally place its origin somewhere in the 3rd or 4th century, written down by people who were part of the wider Gnostic movement, a strand of early Christian thought that focused heavily on inner knowledge rather than outward ritual. Now, here's something important I want you to notice. This isn't some random scribbled pamphlet. It's long. It's structured. It's dense with cosmology, dialogue, hymns, and layered teaching. Whoever wrote this wasn't rambling. They were building an entire spiritual architecture. One person worth knowing here is Carl Schmidt, a German scholar from the early 20th century who did some of the most serious early work translating and studying this manuscript. He wasn't a mystic chasing conspiracy theories. He was a careful academic, and his work helped bring this text out of obscurity and into serious scholarly conversation. My take: this text deserves to be taken seriously precisely because it's not simple. It's not a shortcut spiritual pamphlet promising quick enlightenment. It's dense, layered, sometimes repetitive in a way that feels almost ritualistic, like it was meant to be read slowly, maybe even chanted, not skimmed. And that density is exactly why so few people ever actually read it. It's easier to dismiss a thing than to sit with it. Now let's get into the heart of it, the story of Sophia. Sophia means wisdom in Greek, and in this text, she's not a human being. She's a divine being, one of the Aeons, living in a realm of pure light called the Pleroma. This is the fullness, the source, the place before separation. And Sophia, out of a kind of divine longing, reaches for something beyond her. She wants to know the highest source directly, without a guide, without permission. And she falls. Not because she's punished by an angry God. That's important. Nobody strikes her down. She falls because she reached past her own light and lost her footing in the process. She tumbles out of the fullness and into chaos, into a formless, dark space the text calls the outer darkness, surrounded by forces that mock her and try to consume what light she still carries. Now here's where I want to pause, because this is the part that gets me every time. Doesn't that feel familiar? Think about a moment in your own life where you reached for something, a relationship, an ambition, an idea about who you were supposed to become, and you reached too far, too fast, without really understanding what you were reaching into. And then you found yourself somewhere unfamiliar, confused, surrounded by voices, situations, people who didn't have your best interest in mind. Maybe you even forgot, for a while, who you actually were. That's Sophia's fall. And I don't think it's an accident that this myth reads less like ancient fiction and more like a mirror. She isn't a distant goddess having a bad day in some mythical realm far away from you. She's a pattern, a shape your own life has probably taken at some point, whether you noticed it or not. And here's the part that really strikes me. Nobody rescues her right away. She cries out into the darkness again and again, and for a long time, nothing answers. The silence in that part of the text is almost unbearable to read. It forces you to sit with the discomfort of feeling completely alone, completely unheard. I think that's intentional. I think the writers of this text understood something real about the spiritual life, that before any kind of return, there's usually a period where it feels like no one is coming. Let's zoom out now, because Sophia's fall doesn't happen in an empty universe. It happens inside a structure, and this structure is one of the most fascinating parts of the entire text. The Pleroma isn't just heaven, in the simple sense you might have grown up imagining. It's described as layer upon layer of divine emanations called Aeons, beings of light that unfold outward from the original source, each one a little more distant, a little more differentiated, like ripples moving out from a stone dropped in water. Beneath all of that lies the material world, the world you and I live in every day, described in this text as a kind of holding cell for divine light that got trapped, scattered, and forgotten. According to this cosmology, sparks of that original light are hidden inside human beings, buried under layers of forgetting, controlled by lower cosmic powers that want to keep that light asleep. Gnosis, a Greek word meaning direct, experiential knowledge, is the process of remembering that spark, not obeying your way into heaven, not following a checklist of good behavior, remembering, waking something up that was always there, buried under noise. I'll be honest with you about where I land on this. I find this cosmology more psychologically honest than a simple binary of good behavior sending you up and bad behavior sending you down. This framework says the real work isn't moral scorekeeping, it's clearing away the fog. It's recognizing what's already true about you instead of trying to earn your way into truth from the outside. Whether or not you believe in literal cosmic realms stacked on top of each other, there's something in this structure that maps almost perfectly onto human psychology. Layers of self, layers of forgetting, a buried spark under years of noise and conditioning. That's the part that keeps pulling me back to this text. It's not just theology. It's a description of the inner life, dressed in cosmic language. So here's the question worth sitting with. Why would anyone want a text like this gone? Historically speaking, the wider Christian movement, as it organized into a more centralized institution, needed shared doctrine, shared rituals, and clear lines of authority to hold together across huge distances and cultures. That's not a controversial statement. It's simply how large religious institutions function when they're trying to unify millions of people. And texts like the Pistis Sophia didn't fit neatly into that structure. This text suggests that the deepest teachings of Jesus weren't fully given to the public. They were given secretly, to a smaller circle, after the resurrection, over the course of years. It suggests that real transformation comes through direct inner knowing, not solely through obedience to an external hierarchy. You can probably see why that idea would create friction with any large, centralized religious authority trying to maintain consistent doctrine across an enormous and diverse population. Now here's my opinion, and I want to be clear that this is opinion, not settled historical fact. I think institutional power in general, not just religious power, any kind of large structural power, tends to grow strongest in places where mystery is allowed to stay open just a little too long. A text that says you can know God directly, without needing anyone standing between you and that experience, is, structurally speaking, a threat to any system built on being the necessary middleman. I'm not saying anyone sat in a room twirling a mustache plotting to suppress this text out of malice. Institutions rarely work that dramatically. It's usually slower than that, quieter. Certain texts get copied less. Certain ideas get taught less. Over centuries, what doesn't get repeated simply fades. But fading isn't the same as disappearing. And that scribe in that candlelit room, he understood the difference. Now we come to my favorite part of the whole text, the moment everything turns. After Sophia falls, after she suffers in that outer darkness surrounded by mocking forces, something shifts. She begins to sing 13 hymns of repentance, one after another, each one a cry upward toward the light she came from. I want you to notice something about the word repentance here, because I think it gets misunderstood constantly. In most versions of Christianity you've probably encountered, repentance means guilt. It means feeling bad enough about what you did that you promised to stop doing it. That is not what's happening in these hymns. Sophia isn't groveling. She isn't begging forgiveness for some moral crime. She's remembering. Each hymn is an act of turning her attention back toward the source she came from, recognizing what she always was underneath the confusion and the darkness. It's less "I'm sorry" and more I remember now. That distinction matters enormously to me. Guilt keeps you stuck, looping in shame. Recognition moves you forward. And these 13 hymns function almost like a spiritual technology. Repeated turning, repeated remembering, slowly pulling her light back up out of the depths. Here's where I'll speak from personal conviction, because I think this is the emotional center of the entire video. I don't think the point of this myth is Sophia. I think Sophia is a stand-in for you. In every moment you've ever felt buried under something, depression, addiction, heartbreak, a version of yourself you didn't recognize anymore. The hymn suggests something quietly radical. The way back isn't punishment. It's attention. It's turning your face back toward what's real, again and again, even when nothing answers you the first 10 times. And eventually, in the text, something does answer. Christ descends, not to punish her, but to lift her back up, piece by piece, hymn by hymn, until she's restored to the light she fell from, changed by the experience, but not destroyed by it. I find that unbelievably comforting. Not because it promises an easy path. It doesn't. 13 hymns is a long, repetitive, exhausting process. But it promises that the path back exists, and that it isn't blocked by shame. It's opened by memory. Here's a detail that tends to catch people off guard the first time they hear it. In the Pistis Sophia, Jesus doesn't simply rise from the dead, appear a handful of times, and ascend shortly after, the way you might remember from more familiar accounts. Instead, this text describes him remaining with his closest followers for years afterward, teaching them privately, revealing layers of understanding that were never meant for a general audience. Think about what that idea implies. It suggests a layered teaching structure, public words for the crowd standing outside, and deeper words for the small group willing to sit long enough, ask hard enough, and stay quiet enough to actually receive them. Honestly, I don't find that idea strange at all, once you really sit with it. Nearly every serious tradition of transformation, spiritual, philosophical, even certain schools of psychology, has an outer door for beginners and an inner room for those who've done the work to get there. You don't hand someone the most advanced material on day one. You build up to it. My personal take is that this text is claiming to be that inner room, not a replacement for the public story. An extension of it, the part that comes after you've already grasped the basics and you're hungry for something with more depth. Whether or not that claim is literally, historically true is something scholars will keep debating for a long time. But as a spiritual structure, it makes sense. And it explains, at least partly, why a text like this would circulate quietly among smaller circles instead of being read aloud in a crowded room. So let's bring this back down to your actual life, because that's really what this video has been about the whole time. You've probably had your own Sophia moment. A time you reached too far, lost your footing, and ended up somewhere confusing, surrounded by things that didn't serve you. Maybe you're in a version of that right now. Maybe you're not sure how to find your way back. Here's what I keep coming back to. The fall isn't the end of the story. It's the middle. And the way back isn't about punishing yourself into shape. It's about attention. It's about turning back toward what's real in you, over and over, even when it feels like nothing is answering. I genuinely believe there's a spark in you that hasn't gone anywhere, no matter how buried it feels under noise, obligation, or forgetting. This text, stripped of all its ancient language and cosmic staging, is really just trying to tell you one thing. You are allowed to remember who you were before you got lost. That candlelight scribe from the beginning of this video, he wasn't protecting some obscure curiosity. He was protecting an idea that the deepest truths don't always come from the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes they survive in the quiet places, waiting for someone patient enough to find them. If this kind of hidden, forgotten spiritual history speaks to you, there's a lot more of it waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe if you want to keep walking this path with me, because the return from the fall isn't a single video. It's a journey, and I'd love to keep walking it with you. I'll see you in the next one.